2014, New York. April 13th, Route 52 north to Stormville Mountain Road. We had camped in the parking lot at Route 52 in our truck camper last night. We had arrived here late, and it was a busy road. However, it was an okay place to camp, and the traffic decreased during the night. It was a sunny and warm morning. This section is only a mile and a half that we need to complete to finish this section of the trail that we had done in April of 2010 going south. We had tried to find the AT off the road besides Interstate 84 during that trip. However, we could never find the trail. So we are back and are heading south to where we had left off before. We got onto the trail from the parking lot and found some chives on the side of the trail. A very spring-like day. The trail reached a nice kiosk sign of drawings of the plants and animals that you might see as you walk the Appalachian Trail that was made by the Grange Middle School. The trail was nice through here and went up a hill with some large boulders. However, it was very close to Interstate 84, and we could hear it most of our hike. We reached a nice view of the highway and of some distant mountains. I heard a strange noise. I thought that maybe it was a turkey hunter using one of those turkey collars. We descended to Stormville Mountain Road, and I yelled out, "There it is." We turned around and headed back to our camper. When we reached the parking lot, Dave grabbed our homemade outhouse box to relieve himself in the woods somewhere. He digs a big hole someplace in the woods where we cannot be seen and sets up the toilet box. When we leave, we take it down and refill in the hole. We always leave the area as we had found it. Just as Dave had come back out with the duffel bag that we keep it in, a motorcycle pulled into the parking lot. The man on the bike was walking around our camper checking it out. He left before we reached the camper. April 14th, Graymore Monastery, south to the Osborne Loop Trail. We drove over to Graymore Monastery and moved the truck to a parking lot on South Mountain Pass Road. However, we did not stay here. It was a winding dirt road that was under construction, and the parking area was very slanted, only big enough for one car. So we went back to the monastery and parked near the trail. It was a sunny, windy day with the temperatures around 66 degrees. The sun felt hot because there are no leaves on the trees. We headed south on the AT down to Albany Post Road that was a very busy road intersection, very unrelaxing. We crossed the road and climbed up to South Mountain, which I had struggled with. Dave, however, had flew up it with no problem. As I was really dragging up the mountain behind him, I felt so out of shape at the ripe age of 52. The views at the top was okay, not really worth the climb. I was hoping for a better view. We hiked another mile to the Osborne Loop Trail, marked as Junction 4, so we were pretty close to South Mountain Pass Road. However, we did not want to climb down just to turn around and climb back up. So we turned around here and headed back to the monastery. A security truck for the monastery had drove past us, as we were thinking about camping here for the night. So we moved out of the monastery and onto the dirt road to an AT parking area. It was a small pull-off area and a little slanted, except for everything sliding on the countertop toward the sink. It really was not too bad. During the night, we could hear peepers outside our window, which made for a very relaxing night. April 16th, Elk Pen parking area, north to junction of the New York Long Trail. Yesterday, we took the train to New York City. We arrived back here today to the fastest change in weather that I can remember. Yesterday, it was in the 70s and warm out in New York City. Today, it was 28 degrees, and it had snowed out here with about a half of an inch of fresh snow on the ground. We were freezing on our drive to the Elk Pen parking lot. The road up here had black ice on it at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was sunny out with nice blue skies and very windy, which made it even colder when we got to the trail. We got onto the trail with coats, ski pants, and gloves on. We met two hikers that were covered in new Gore-Tex. They took our picture here with the mountain behind us covered in snow. We took their picture with an icicle on a tree behind them. This section of the trail was very beautiful. However, it was also very rocky. There was no brush or pickers around in these woods. There was open views through grassy fields that might get overgrown during the summer. Some of the large boulders here were house size. Luckily, they were along the side of the trail, and we did not have to climb up them. We saw a large pond after we had climbed up over Green Pond Mountain. Then the trail went around Island Pond and to an old mill site with a nice stone foundation that had funneled water for a turbine. We went through a large boulder formation known as the Lemon Squeezer, an Appalachian Trail landmark for the New York section. We were excited to see it, and it was fun going through it. Some icicles were on the sides of the boulders that we had to squeeze through and looked like some of the higher ones would fall into this narrow space as we were walking through. And some of the large boulders we had to climb up on also had ice on it. I had loved Island Pond Mountain. It was so beautiful. It had warmed up to around 40 degrees when we stopped here to eat our lunch in a crevasse of the mountain. The sun felt nice, and some of the snow on the ground here was melting. It was nice here in the crevasse as we were protected from the wind. We reached the sign at the junction of the New York Long Trail, which is our turnaround point for the day. We had only done about 5 miles today out and back today. However, we had got off to a late start after returning from our New York City trip. It was a nice day, but a cold day. April 17th, Elk Pen Parking Area, south to Orange Turnpike. Last night, we had parked in the parking for the AT, and during the night, as we were relaxing, a park police officer drove up to our camper and told us that we could not camp in the parking lot. The trail for the AT was right behind the camper. We told him that we were doing the AT and that we were hiking this section in the morning. He let us stay here for the night. However, he had told us that we would have to leave here after our hike. It was cold out again this morning. 2 hikers in the parking lot had just told us that they had done 9 miles for exercise this morning. They told us that the section that we were doing today is called Agony Rocks, and that it is the hardest part of this section of the trail because of the really large boulders that we would have to go over, and that there was a lot of PUDs over many peaks to reach the top of Arden Mountain. I was still tired from yesterday's hike and was dragging a little this morning to get going today. Today we would be only doing a wimpy 4 miles, and we had an entire day to do it. However, it was the hardest 4 miles. It was a nice cool 50-degree day with blue skies and no bugs. We had a nice view of Interstate 87 at the first peak. We sat here and ate our lunch enjoying the views of the distant mountains. Dave had his emberlit stove and we had a cup of tea. I could see the tail of a baby rattlesnake slipping under a rock when I was peeing. I was so close that I could almost touch it. We continued on the trail and finally reached Orange Turnpike, our turnaround point for today's hike. On our way back, I had fell when my poles had slipped on some ice on a rock going down one of the many peaks. Dave had started to slide down backward, going up one of the slanted boulders that was still wet from yesterday's snow. We had to camp at the Garrison train station as we could not find anywhere that we could camp that was close to Bear Mountain, where we had planned to hike in the morning and we had to pay to park here. April 18th, Bear Mountain, Beacon HI way north to the Osborne Loop Trail. I do not have much to say about this section of the trail, except that it is done. It was a very hard climb up from the road over lots of rocks, and we had done a small amount of PUDs. We reached South Mountain Road, a passable dirt road. The trail here was a little flooded, and after we crossed the road, it was about a mile before we had reached the section of the trail that we had turned around on the 14th at the Osborne Loop Trail. There were lots of people that had come up behind us on the trail to go to Anthony Knows, a tourist attraction that is off the AT on the Osborne Loop Trail. They come up Camp Smith Trail from Bear Mountain Road. We went to the overlook that overlooked Bear Mountain Bridge and the Hudson River. It was a great view of Bear Mountain State Park. On our way back, we had met the 2 hikers that we had taken their picture at Cat Rocks that were only section hiking this section of the AT in New York. They told us that they had finished Bear Mountain Park. We, however, had not yet finished this section. April 19th, Bear Mountain Park south to Seven Lakes Drive. We had arrived early at Bear Mountain State Park at around 7:30 this morning. It was sunny and warm, with the temperatures in the 70s with no bugs. Bear Mountain was surprisingly beautiful, with the stone steps that the ATC made going up the mountain from the park that was beyond belief. Lots of people were climbing the mountain today. The climb was hard, and I saw the first trout lily of the season. We reached the top and went up the Perkins Memorial Tower, which honors George W. Perkins, the visionary behind the Palisades Interstate Park System. It was dedicated in 1934 and has offered sweeping views of the Hudson Valley and, on clear days, the New York City skyline. I enjoyed the tower because of its age and the tiles of the animal figurines inside. We came down the south side of the mountain with awesome views from the rock ledges. We crossed Seven Lakes Road and took the 1777 West Trail into the historical abandoned town of Doodletown. The name is said to be derived from the Dutch doodle, or dead valley. The early residents worked as loggers and miners, and it is said that the remains of the mines are still visible today, although we did not see any. Bear Mountain began to develop it as a park in the early 20th century. A school, church, and tons of homes were demolished. It was really a shocking event. Not much was left here now, except for some foundations here that had some information signs on wooden posts. We continued on to the 177 East Trail, back to the parking lot, and then walked the AT through the Trailside Museum and Zoo. I actually liked the zoo, and all the animals seemed to be well taken care of. The animals were rescued and cared for by the zoo staff. The biggest attraction, of course, was the 2 cinnamon-colored bears. My favorite animal was here. Yes, it was the owl. I love owls, and it is part of my trail name. April 20th, Route 52 south to the top of Hosner Mountain. We camped here off of Route 52, and it is our last day of the trip, and it is Easter Sunday. It's a nice morning, but cold, and I woke up with a stiff shoulder, and I could barely get out of bed. We are redoing a piece of the trail again that we had already done. It's just a short piece. However, we need to redo this section again, as there is no good place to park for the trail off of Hosner Mountain Road. The caretaker for this area maintains the RPH shelter and this section of the trail, and he does a fantastic job with the trail. This section is not really very scenic. No views, just a walk in a mostly hardwood forest. We crossed Hosner Mountain Road and started our climb up over some boulders to the view on the top of the mountain. We had climbed up to here in October of 2011 from the RPH shelter. We were sitting here eating our lunch on a rock that overlooked the farmlands below when we had heard a loud crash behind us in the woods. I thought that it was a bear crashing through the woods, but we did not see anything behind us. We later thought that it must have been a tree that fell somewhere in the woods. On our way back, we heard some turkey calls, but it sounded more like the calls that hunters make to attract the turkeys. The day was nice, sunny and warm, and we have to go home today. We would like to keep going on the trail, but we have to go back to work and wait until we can take our vacation in October.